We are very pleased to welcome Danilo Silva Guimarães. Am I saying your name correctly?
Yes, it's okay.
Wonderful. And Danilo is with us in Brazil currently, in São Paulo, following the beautiful offering that we currently offer as Earthbeat Festival, the Human Potential and Moving Uncertainty into Action. Just a quick kind of note how it came about. A few months ago, we were supposed to have Earthbeat Festival in New Zealand. A few days before that, it got cancelled due to COVID-19. And after the quick shock that we had from it and the impact that it had on us as a crew, as a festival organization that is solely people work for that with lots of love. And the remuneration is what we receive when we see people coming together with shared purpose. And it got us to think, what else can we do at the moment and how we can emphasize and bring the purpose that we have to be alive. And that purpose is actually to provide platform for presence transformation, so we can actually present new ways of living. And this series came about as a result of that, which basically it enhances that purpose that we took wholeheartedly, and we keep exploring that. What does that mean to us? Yesterday we had an awesome talk with Charles Eisenstein, which you can obviously watch. And today we're going to have a privilege to welcome Professor Danilo from the University of São Paulo. Danilo is a professor in psychology department, and especially around the indigenous and around São Paulo. And I'm glad because Gisele sent me a few things, and just to kind of have a bit of an idea. So I'll kind of go through a few highlights of what you guys do, and then I'll hand it to you, Danilo. Danilo founded in 2012 the Ameridian Support Network, and that's within the Institute of Psychology in the University in São Paulo. And that's basically a network to have dialogue with indigenous and to offer a space for dialogue to truly understand the psychological construction of their reality, how they perceive that. He also built a House of Indigenous Cultures in 2017, and I believe that this house is actually in the university, where you guys hold meetings and ceremonies in uni, and bringing, which is really significant because it's actually going to a government institution, state institution, and building something that reflects the indigenous. So it's in a way opening doors into government institutions to recognize the importance of indigenous culture. So that's a massive thing. So basically, I know you support as well through your book as well, constructive way of dialogue and talking to indigenous, to really come up with a clean slate, because normally psychology is based on the foundations of Roman, Judaism, Christianity, the mainstream religion. So psychology is kind of around that values. And so when we go to speak to different indigenous, we often come with this construction that we have in our mind, rather than seeing and understanding what it is indigenous path of psychology, of wellness, of perception of the world around them. So we love it, and obviously we can relate to it as well in New Zealand, and I'm sure we can touch on that as well, because you have visited New Zealand as well. So Danilo, can kind of tell us a quick about you and what you're doing, and I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Isaac, and also thank you, Gisele, for talking to me about this event. I would like to first talk about a coincidence we have here, because I was in New Zealand in 2018, I was invited by Maori professors. These professors, they were in Brazil a year before in 2017, and they visited our indigenous house at the university. This house you just talked about.
Wonderful.
And after that, and I presented them the house, and then they decided to invite me and Professor Gustavo, that's a colleague of mine, to know their work in the field of indigenous psychology in New Zealand. To that moment, I didn't call my work as indigenous psychology. Was after this visit to New Zealand that I could understand my work as a work in the field of indigenous psychology. Please let me know if you have any trouble with connection or.
It's okay currently.
Okay, it's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So then I could realize that my work was on work in the field of the indigenous psychology. Well, in Brazil, psychological studies were not focused. They didn't focus indigenous population mostly. The same around the world. Indigenous population are not actually in the focus of psychology. And when I started these studies with about indigenous issues and reading a lot of anthropological stuff, many people told me to go to anthropology or to become an anthropologist because it was not psychology, actually. They think that it was not psychology. And so it was very challenging to include this topic and the indigenous issue, the indigenous topics in the psychological field. And even more challenging was to talk about an indigenous psychology because, well, in the few moments that indigenous people were considered in psychological studies, they were considered as object of study and not as a subject that could talk about psychological issues and reflect about psychological issues and construct knowledge about psychological issues. No? So I'm very, very grateful about this visit to New Zealand, these meetings with the Maori professors, and because they created this opportunity for me to go some steps further in the path I was trying to follow, you know. And so thank you again, Isaac and Gisele, for this opportunity here again to talk to a New Zealand. Of course, this meeting is open for all around the world, but it's proposed in the New Zealand context. So it's for me a very happy opportunity.
Nice.
Well, you asked me to make a brief presentation of myself. I could say that one of my indigenous backgrounds is Mashakali people. Mashakali people is now in very small lands located in the northeast region of a Brazilian state called Minas Gerais. That's very close to Bahia, the south of Bahia, in the border, actually. Nevertheless, unfortunately, I was not presented to the indigenous community when I was a child, or when I was adolescent. I could visit the Mashakali community only after I concluded my undergraduate course in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And we have some historical reasons for that in Brazil. I don't know. I think that most people don't know that indigenous people in Brazil they conquered the right to be indigenous, to have this support of the state to continue their traditions after the constitution of in the end of the 80s, you know. So they were acknowledged by the state as indigenous people. Brazilian state was acknowledged as a multi-ethnic society. So the state had to support the social organization, customs, languages, creeds, and traditions. So until then, indigenous people were kind of suffering a process of integration, like the state was trying to integrate them into Brazilian society as citizens without any ethnic background. You know? Only in 2010, in the Brazilian census that counts the people, people were asked about their ethnic backgrounds. So it was a sort of a category, a very hidden category in Brazilian society. You know? So we have, so to that moment when I was a child, my people were facing a war to survive, to have a place to live. We have many reports about children that were kidnapped from their families, elders that were killed, women that were raped, among other human rights violations. At the same time, the indigenous image was actively depreciated in order to distance people from the communities. You know? So it was a project addressing to vanish our understanding of the history and our bonds with our communities. So the Brazilian state, the landowners, the church actively worked in this genocide and ethnocide. And ethnocide is about is when an ethnos, a community-based way of living, is completely destroyed, you know, through many instruments, many devices to destroy a community-based way of living. Nevertheless, this destruction was not completed. It was not accomplished, you know. Through our memories, it's possible to follow the path to create new meetings in a new moment with different concrete people, to share memories, feelings, and understanding about this colonial process. We have in our bodies the how to say it, the memories in the body, and not only in the narratives. And this colonial process continues throughout the time until nowadays. So I could only visit Machacali community when after I finished my undergraduate studies. And after I visited the community and talked to them about these memories, I decided to visit the communities of another indigenous people in Brazil, the Mba Guarani people. And why? Because I live in São Paulo, that's in the southest part in the country, around 1,500 kilometers from my birthplace. So it's very far. I cannot be there all the time when I want. So it was hard to regularly meet Machacali people. On the other hand, we have Guarani people in the perimeter of São Paulo, of the municipality I live in. So I can be in an indigenous community 20 minutes or 30 minutes from my house. So it's not far, talking about Brazilian dimension and territory, you know.
Very big.
Yeah, yeah. So we
Yeah.
are very close to the indigenous here. But it's Guarani people. It's not Machacali.
Mm.
But um, we
Because
are
there
very
is many
open.
indigenous in Brazil, right? There's many
Yeah,
groups of
yeah,
indigenous in every area. And there
yeah,
is close to 1 million people that are considered to be indigenous in Brazil.
yeah, self-declared.
Oh, self-declared. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
but we have 305 different ethnic groups
Oh, wow.
and 276 native spoken languages.
Wow, that's okay.
So that's a complexity of our situation here.
276 languages, and the spoken language is Portuguese from Europe.
Yeah, the
Nice.
main.
So that goes to what you said, as colonialism still keeps being part
Yeah,
of life in a way, right? Okay.
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Mm. So,
So
so
that's why this was to meet Guarani people was a way, from my point of view, to transform uncertainty into action. If I could use the name of these
nice.
conferences, you know, it was not. It was very hard to be or to meet Machacali people, but it didn't paralyze me. I could find or circumvent somehow the situation and meeting Guarani people here. And these meetings were very, very good. They were very open to me, to my memories, and also to strengthen me and to support me in these meetings with my ancestrality and guiding me somehow in this process, you know. So we have now, through
Beautiful.
this project, um, an academic collaboration between Guarani people and the university, but also an spiritual collaboration because psychology is in the origin, the study of psyche. Psyche is uh, the Greek name for the soul or the spirit. And so psychologists are very, I think, create an opportunity for us to construct knowledge and also to improve our beings, our soul and our body. You know?
Mm.
And
Wonderful.
we, as you also mentioned it, we started to work in a sort of collaboration that's through dialogues and through collaboration also in the production of the work in the universities, like co-authoring papers and chapters and projects. And that's the main idea of this work.
Mm. Okay. So the main idea is to keep dialogue and communication
Yeah,
and to really understand the group of indigenous people that you currently work with, um, but it can apply to other indigenous these practices of
yeah.
dialogue and yeah.
The idea is not only to understand, of course, we need to understand at least partially, because we will never understand completely the other.
That's right.
But the main idea is to create conditions for collaborating, for mutual collaboration, you know. So is to reflect about how can we somehow subvert this colonial history through a different kind of encounter with the other. So we need to create it together. So it's not the idea of like the indigenous are, as an object that I need to know, but the indigenous as a partner that dialogues and with who we can construct something together.
Mm. So to create the right conditions for collaboration in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And what these conditions would be? Because these conditions could be applied in a way to any form of dialogue. There is certain
Yeah.
conditions that needs to be met to be able to have dialogue with someone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So we reflect on this. What are the conditions for a dialogue? What are the limits for dialogue in this interethnic or intercultural border? And how what we need, which kind of situation we need to create in order to allow the dialogue to happen. For instance, you talked about the indigenous house we built there. Before, when we didn't have this house at the university, we invited the indigenous leaders and indigenous people to talk with the academic community in the auditorium of the university. And after some meetings in this auditorium, some indigenous leaders told me, well, it's not actually, it's good to have this opportunity, it's good to talk to you, but the structure of the auditorium is not actually, how can I say?
Inspiring enough.
Yeah, inspiring enough, or
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
idea. And so then we started to talk about a different place in which they could feel comfortable to talk. And we constructed a project, that's the project for an indigenous house at the university. This project had to be approved in many instances at the university. We had to get funding and a lot of issues, but so it was not very easy it was not easy
To
at
make it
all
happen.
to make it, but it was possible because we could create a trustful situation in which they could talk about these concerns, and we could uh, create a project together, present it to the dean of the institute, and then to the pro-rectorship, and so on. So um, our knowledge is about dialogue, not actually about the indigenous, you know, it's about dialogue.
And that can apply to basically anything that we're currently facing as a global community around the world is that dialogue. And I like one of the conditions that needs to be met from what you describe is to have for people safe place that they feel comfortable, you know, like the indigenous, the auditorium was okay, but they felt a lot more safe to talk in a space that resembles, looks, feels like what they are familiar with. It's like in New Zealand, marae for
Yeah,
Maoris, right?
yeah,
And in a way that's a similar thing. Okay.
yeah. The Marai, when the Maori professors invited me to visit the universities in New Zealand, they were one of the reasons was because they were interested in showing me the marais, because you have at the universities the marais, but in
That's right.
Brazil we I didn't had it was a sort of the unique place we have in the university with that's not a place that resembles indigenous an indigenous traditional house. It
Okay.
is an indigenous traditional house because it was built by the indigenous. So we had the shaman came. They decided the place because they could observe the area and understand that that place was adequate for the house construction. And
Mm.
also the architecture, they proposed we had to put in a paper to draw it in a technical drawing in architecture. So we had to make a partnership with the architecture institute,
Okay.
and they the indigenous went to there and to we make a sort of miniature of the house, and then the architect could draw it in order to the university to accept the project. And then after that, the indigenous came to build it, and we helped it like it was a sort of a community-based construction.
Beautiful.
So they started to build, and we supported them uh, as we could, because we didn't have an experience about building houses. So they guided us in all this process, and it was very. And now is a place. It's their place. So they decided about who's in the sense of what we could do, what we should do in this place, what we shouldn't, what's not very good for us to do in this place. A kind of advice, you know.
Mm.
They make advices for us to how to take care on these places, on this house, and they call this house an opu. That's a traditional house for sing and for the rituals and for shamanic procedures too.
Mm.
They feel this house as a potential house for their traditional practices.
Because that's
So
another thing that indigenous bring is the knowledge of shamanism, of
yeah,
spirituality,
yeah,
which to the Western world, it seems to be something that we can explore as an object,
mm,
shamanism or things like that, rather than actually, it's more like a scientific sort of testing of how it is, right? And that's something that these knowledge systems of shamanism and spirituality, that's something that you guys want to keep alive for the indigenous, to keep practicing, to keep bringing that.
yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. We have a discussion about that oppose scientific knowledge to the shamanic knowledge of Amerindian people. At least I'm talking about the indigenous people of America. You know, for
And America
the
is basically all America, which is the North and South
yeah yeah
America. Yeah.
yeah. We are very similar, uh, despite we are very diverse.
Mm,
There are many similar principles from Patagonia to Alaska, you know.
mm, that's right.
And one of these aspects is the understanding of knowledge as a process of defining the other as a subject. That's different from the scientific perspective that defines the other as an object.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a scientific perspective that's a relationship, that's a kind of relationship that's the researcher is the subject in face of an object that is a passive object. And the researcher is an active subject. The
Yeah.
activity is in the side of the researcher, and the passivity is in the side of the object. And the researcher can control and manipulate the object
Yeah.
of study.
It's very arrogant in a way.
Yes. And on the other side, in the side to the indigenous people, we have to know something is to define it as a subject and to relate with it as a subject. So the subject is not only another person, like human being, Homo sapiens, but the subject can be a mountain, a river, an animal, a plant. Um, so it's another ontology, we could say. It's another way to live and to construct the reality. The reality is constructed in a very different way, um, that didn't pass, or that didn't consider the separation between nature and culture, between body and soul, and so on. The division is different to the indigenous people. Huh?
Yeah. So to the indigenous people, nature is part of being. The earth, the natural resources. For indigenous, it's a lot more connected than, I guess, in a way, maybe our Western world, which is less and less connected to nature in a way.
Yeah, because for the I don't like this word Western, because actually the Western was constructed when the Europeans came to America, and Western is an opposition to the Eastern.
Mm.
So we the modern Western societies, they were only possible because the Europeans came to America, and they got the gold, and they got the food supplies, and
All the
the knowledge,
resources
and the knowledge, also the knowledge of
and
the
the
indigenous
knowledge.
people to construct their society. So that's the Western, and so we are not opposing the indigenous to the Western, but I'm trying to create an opposition between kind of shamanic knowledge and scientific knowledge, or indigenous and European, that I think it's more precise. But I
Mm.
understand, and most of, and me too, sometimes I use this idea of Western as if Western were only the Europeans, but it's not really precise. But okay.
Yeah.
Uh, yes, but the indigenous, the science, the modern science, with this division opposing the subject and the object, they create distance. So the opposing culture and nature, they create distance, and it's you to have a culture is more available than to be in the nature, to develop cognition and intellectual capacities is more valued than developing feelings, emotions, and embodied capacities. And we create a lot of divisions based on this opposition between the subject and the object, and the nature in the side of the object, and the culture and the mind in the side of the subject. So we oppose and create distance between these realms that this society divided. But for the indigenous, the divisions are other. we have divisions, of course, because to perceive something is to differentiate something from a background or to create difference. But the difference is not about nature and culture. The division is about, we could say, about the community and the other communities of the other beings. So we have a multiplicity of communities, all of them with nature and culture.
Mm.
So, and we have a division of knowledge, we could say. The knowledge of a community or a person develop can be very specific and very useful for the community and can be exchanged with other communities and so on. So it's a very different, we call it in philosophy, a different ontology, we could say, like a different way to perceive reality, to create reality, to understand reality.
Mm. It goes really well with what you said. And I like that as well because I feel this is something that we're currently facing around the world, not only in Brazil. And you said, my goal is to contribute in the constitution and maintenance of an ethos capable of hosting diversity in a contemporary world so deeply strained by polarization, oppression, silencing of others, and something of alterity. Dialogical multiplication from semiotic cultural constructive perspective in psychology may be a tool in that direction, which basically is what can you go around it? How can we achieve these concepts of people really divided, silencing someone if you said something, and we can see it a lot with even COVID-19. I'm assuming there is big impact in indigenous people in Brazil with COVID,
Yeah.
and how they're really exposed to that as well. And I really resonate with that goal of yours, because that's something that is everywhere at the moment, is like that in a way.
Mhm.
So how do you find tools to actually overcome these divisions and suppression and silencing? What can we do? What tools have we got to be able to
Mhm.
have less of that?
Yes, I could talk about it. I think in two levels. That's a very important issue you bring. That one level is the level focusing on how I can I'm working to open psychology to dialogue with these perspectives, indigenous perspectives. So that's one level of this question. Another level you also uh, presented is how can we open, for instance, public policies on healthcare assistance to dialogue with these communities in order to minimize or the suffering concerning COVID-19 or other issues. No?
Mm.
So going to the first part, I think in psychology, I think the to open psychology to dialogue with different perspectives, we need to first understand the roots of psychology in a specific tradition. So as you told, psyche, we have this myth, Eros and Psyche. I don't know if you understand.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, it's a Greek mythology, and from this Greek mythology, this society developed some reflections, and also in the 15th century, the humanist philosophers that were very linked with Christianity used this word psyche from this, took this character of the myth, of the Greek myth,
Okay.
in order to talk about what they think that was universal aspect of human beings.
Mm.
And used this mythological character and associated it with logos, that's reasoning, to create a science or a philosophical reflection that only in the 19th century became science, because they could use these reflections to methodologically, through a methodological based program for knowledge construction, through the creation of the laboratory of psychophysiology in Germany. So there is a history. The science is not neutral, is not about the nature of human beings, the universals. The science try to talk about the universals, but the science always work with very culturally grounded basis for knowledge construction. So we need first to understand that we are culturally, the knowledge we construct is a knowledge based on a cultural setting.
So we've been conditioned to it.
Yeah.
In a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Then if I acknowledge that, the second aspect is to understand that the other not necessarily share this cultural background, and the other the cultural background of the other is not necessarily worse or less relevant or less valuable than mine. So I would say in psychology is to avoid dogmatic attitude and avoid eclectic attitude. The dogmatic attitude is a way in which an attitude that I consider my perspective superior to the other, and I disqualify the other as not reasonable or admissible. So if I'm a dogmatic scientist, I would say the shamanic knowledge is bullshit, and other cultural knowledge are not valuable. It's not relevant. I disqualify the other if I'm a dogmatic scientist.
Yeah.
But the same if I'm an eclectic scientist. If I suppose, or if I'm not able to see the other as different and to see myself as a specific perspective, the eclectic attitude is prevents us from the contact with the difference of the other, supposing that behind all this difference, we are all the same. So it's an easy or a very fast step to the idea of equality that avoids the contact with the experience of the difference. So if I don't experience the difference of the other, if I avoid it, I also I'm not seeing the other. So it's not a very good to a dialogical perspective to have this kind of eclectic attitude.
It needs to be with experience.
Yeah, we need to be able to experience the disquieting feeling that is to confront ourselves in the relation with the other, and to understand, well, the other is different. What they say is not the same as me. What I'm saying is not actually coherent to them. So we need to dialogue.
Yeah.
We need to dialogue to make it more profitable to both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch quickly. I know you visited in New Zealand as well, and I'm really keen to understand what did you find the differences between Maoris, indigenous in New Zealand, and what you're familiar with, indigenous in Brazil? Is there any differences that you felt, or you felt we can do something like that in Brazil, or whatever that is?
It's very, very hard to me to talk about Maori people because I know very few about Maori.
Okay.
But I was very how can I say, I cannot say motivated to know more.
Nice.
I want to know more because I appreciate what I could see. Um, I was of course, there are many differences. For instance, with kind of rituals or with kind of plants you use, Maori people use to treat or to create to healthcare conditions for people. So indigenous people in Brazil usually use a lot of tobacco in a pipe.
Yeah.
To the rituals.
Hape.
Rapé also, yeah.
Yeah.
There are different ways for to use tobacco, and Maori people, I know that they don't use tobacco. So we have also the differences. We have 276 native spoken languages, and Maori people is more kind of uniform in terms of they can understand each other in our communities. So
I guess Maori would be regarding as one group out of the 270 or 305 groups indigenous in Brazil. So I guess Maori is one group that can reflect that. And I guess what else can other people around the world can do in promoting and helping indigenous elsewhere, like someone in New Zealand or someone in Australia or whatever? How can we basically play a role in support indigenous rights in a way? And in a way, it's also preservation of the planet as well, right? So how can we
yeah.
support stuff like that? Obviously, one of them is by talking to people like yourself, and opening that up. But is there
Yeah.
other things we can explore? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that a good way is to start to know an indigenous people close to your place, to visit them, to get to know the people, to create a relationship with them. And also, and then you can talk about them to other people in your institution or in your the places you go. You can talk about these people. At least in Brazil, we have this a very constructed, depreciated image of the indigenous people. So people, they don't know that we have indigenous people in São Paulo, for instance. They think, oh, indigenous are only in Amazon. We don't have indigenous here. But 40% of indigenous population in Brazil are in the cities. They are not in the forests.
Okay. Okay.
So, so they don't know that maybe the neighbor is an indigenous person. People don't know about that. And also, they usually say see the indigenous as very lazy people, or yeah, you know,
Yeah,
we
just
have a
taking.
lot
Yeah.
of people that are faking. Um, yeah, we have a lot of. I don't want to remember all this uh, uh, discrimination, bad
Yeah.
discrimination words, the bad words they use to talk about indigenous people.
Mm.
So for me, it's a way of reversing this. So if we get familiar with some indigenous people and we understand what happens, maybe we can talk and share this understanding with other people and create a better conditions for us to live. But also, I think taking care about the environment, you know, about the trash and not consuming a lot. So trying to consume environmentally uh, uh,
Yeah, the
things that,
impact that we have on
yeah,
the environment. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. And I really want to touch something. Obviously, if there is other questions around, we would love to take them. I think we're approaching almost 1 hour. Time flies, actually.
yeah,
But my perception of indigenous is, I guess, is slightly different in terms of I feel myself that in a way we are all indigenous,
yeah.
every single human being on this planet. What do you think makes someone actually to be indigenous? Aren't we all indigenous? Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or what makes someone to be defined as an indigenous?
Yes, I made myself this question when I wrote this book. You put in the website that's principles for an indigenous psychology, and I was reflecting that all psychology is indigenous because all psychology is rooted in a cultural uh, ground. Uh, but okay, we could understand that we are all indigenous because we all have our ancestral origins and we all have our cultural background. Culture cultivate us as we are now and cultivate other people as they are now. So we are all indigenous.
Mm,
We have an indigenous friend of mine that says a Guarani friend of mine that says the opposite of indigenous is the alien, you know, because indigenous
that's
is
true.
who belongs to the land, to the earth. That's the meaning of indigenous, the person that belongs to the land. We
Mm,
all belong to this land. Our global or the world is only one for all the people. So we are all indigenous. Uh, who are not indigenous is someone that came from another land, another planet.
that's right. That's
But
right.
but we have a difference, I think. That's what I use it to make a distinction between indigenous psychology and non-indigenous psychology, because we can have a colonialist attitude that is an attitude in which we disconsider the difference of the other. We disconsider the way people belong to the land, and we impose a very specific way as if it were neutral or it were not culturally grounded, you know. So we
Mm,
can have colonialists. We can be colonialists imposing our values to all the people in the land. We can have a colonialist psychology that impose the cultural values of the uh, Greek, Greek, Latin, Judeo, Christian culture, the imposing these values to other people. So for me, this psychology and this tradition, that's in positive tradition, is not indigenous because it can be, it's destroying the planet, actually.
That's true. Yeah.
So
it's ultimately to preserve and to be the guardian of the land,
yeah,
as we all are. And I agree with you. We have been
we all can
removed.
be.
We all
We all
can
can,
be. That's true.
but we all can destroy if we don't take care.
Yeah, and we can see that polarization. In one hand, there is the destruction, and in one hand, there is people that want to maintain and preserve and
Yeah,
and grow more trees and plant more plants.
yeah,
So in a way, we can always see this struggle of these
yeah,
forces.
yeah,
And I guess if you look about the uncertainty of things, it's also to accept that it's coexisting in a way.
yeah,
And I like what you said at the beginning. You said the uncertainty is to keep doing something that you're passionate about, regardless of if you know or don't know what's going to happen, because we don't really know
yeah,
what's going to happen. It's always like that.
yeah.
It was never not like that, really. Have you got any questions, Gisele or someone else that keen to ask anything? That's potentially a good time. If there is, Sina, is there any Facebook questions or something that we want to kind of, yeah. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. Your area of semiotic cultural conservatism and dialogical multiplication, what sort of empowerment we can bring to indigenous through this process, I guess? Because that's a good,
I don't, I
the,
do not.
how indigenous psychology in your area of research, semiotic cultural conservatism, constructivism, and dialogical multiplication could bring some sort of empowerment to indigenous people in Brazil and maybe anywhere else, I guess.
Mm, mm.
It is a way
Well,
of dialogue, right?
yeah, yeah. It's for me, this field, semiotic cultural constructivism, is somehow it's a sort of house. I could bring a metaphor to talk about it.
Mm.
It's a house that could host me and my indigenous questions, and to make me able to put in dialogue the indigenous issues with the rest of psychology. I didn't feel comfortable to talk about indigenous issues from other perspectives in psychology. I know that maybe it's possible too, and maybe indigenous psychologists or someone could open the possibility to introduce indigenous issues in psychology from different approaches. And I'm sure that's possible. But for me, in my life, in my experience, the opportunity to talk about indigenous issues was open in this field because it prioritizes, uh, it understands the human beings as culturally constructed. So this field understands psychology as a cultural production and not as something neutral or above culture. And so it allowed us to listen to uh, different cultural perspectives about psychological issues. And one of these perspectives are the indigenous. but not only the indigenous or not only the Amerindian perspective. I think we also understand the art production as culturally based, of course, science as culturally based, and every human production as culturally based. So for me, it was a way to dialogue, to create conditions for dialogue.
Mm. And that's awesome. And maybe just a personal question: how would you want to see the world around us evolving because of what's going on right now? What would be Danilo's ultimate evolution? You know what I mean?
Yeah. You used the word evolving. I understand well.
Yeah.
We in
Evolução.
Brazil, yeah, we say maybe involving, like in a way of we have in Brazil the idea of psychology of development. That's psicologia do desenvolvimento.
Okay.
That's based on an evolutionary idea. And we talk about a psychology of involvimento, like putting people together, not developing and going in a way of evolutionary
Yeah.
perspective. But,
I love it. It's actually being involved,
yeah, yeah,
not allow something to let you evolve, but actually get part of it.
yeah, that's it.
Okay. That's great. So keep doing whatever we do to be involved in the evolution
Yeah.
of things. Okay.
I don't like the word evolution, but I know that I can feel that you are using it in a way that's very
I
attuned to.
actually I'm going to start using involvolution because I like that because we need to be more involved
Yeah.
in the process of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I really resonate with that. So the involved part, and I wish we're going to be able to see that actually more and
Yeah.
more. And anything that you want to say, leave with our audience before we wrap it up? Anything that you want to leave with the audience? Something, whatever that is, anything?
Well, I it's a little bit hard because I'm not seeing the audience, but I know that there is someone
There
in the other
exist.
side of this screen.
That's right.
So I'd like to say thank you again, Isaac, Gisele, and all the people that are here listening to us. Um, I'd like to talk about my gratitude to the Maori people because I hope we can meet each other again. I can visit you, and some Maori people can come to Brazil and visit and know our work. So it's it's great
Wonderful.
to have this opportunity and to I could see your project, and I think that it's very important to have these meetings and to talk about all these issues, human potential, and put ourselves into action, not paralyzed with our preconceptions, our understandings that are dogmatic or eclectic and go very fast to differentiate us from the other, or to be indifferent from the about the other, like not see the difference. So put us in question, keep our uncertainties, and reflect together together in this idea of involvement. I think that's the main idea. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. That was a
Thank you.
beautiful summary and wrap up of that.
Mm-hmm.
Danilo, I really appreciate your time. And it's been really pleasure to speak to you all from the other side of the world and in a different reality that you currently face. I really
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it. Gisele, thank you for suggestions and organizing that as well. And Sina for the awesome technical work at the background at the moment. This is the obviously Human Potential Earthbeat Festival. We still have a couple of sessions to go in the next coming weeks. And then new things are going to involve, we're going to be involved with. So lots of gratitude to all. And Isaac here, and we shall see you soon. Thank you so much.